So you didn't have your heart in leadership?
No, absolutely not. I just didn't see myself as a leader. Every day was quite scary, and you can do things that you don't realise you can actually do.
Can I ask, what is your why?
Educator and leader.
With a multi-decade-long career
at almost 10 schools. Cohen.
The principal is the only person who really understands what another principal's going through, and it can be quite a lonely job.
How do you define success as a leader?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So much more is being put onto teachers. We'll let the schools sort that out. The schools need to be doing this. Why aren't the schools teaching that? The pressure that's been put on teachers at the same time as the outer world becoming a far more difficult place is almost unsustainable. And she's right, you can't save them all. But what you can do is help lift their gaze. It's not going to work for some of them, but it is going to work for some of them. And that's the thing. If you make a difference to one kid in the class, wow, that's a huge thing. So it's been a good journey.
Kim, it kind of seems inescapable that the earliest context of our lives kind of shapes us into who we are and the trajectory of what we do. And so I think it seems fitting to start with asking you a question of, what do I need to know to understand who you are and the person kind of sitting in front of me?
It's always a difficult one to answer, to think back to your childhood. So obviously you can hear from my accent that I come from South Africa, and it was an interesting time growing up in apartheid years. I guess you'd say I was lucky because I am a white person, and having been in South Africa in those years, the apartheid years, everything was skewed in our favour. But luckily I came from a family where it was recognised that the place we were the way we were growing up was not normal and not acceptable. And one of my sisters, I have 3 sisters, was a journalist, and she would often come home with stories that could never be published because of censorship in South Africa. So we became very aware of the inequities and the position that we were in, the very privileged position. So I guess a feeling of gratitude, but also a feeling of being aware of social injustices happening around me has certainly been part of my formative years. And I've always been very aware of the importance of being engaged and helping out others wherever you possibly can. By no means was I ever an activist, and I won't claim to be such, but certainly during those years I was very aware of what was happening, and probably didn't have a loud enough voice to say what needed to be said in those times. But I did become very, very aware of the importance of education, because different sectors in South Africa had access to different levels of education. And it became very, very obvious when apartheid ended and schools were then open to all races, that there were a number of people who'd really, really experienced a much poorer form of education that had been offered to them.
Okay, right. I think that's quite interesting, because most people, when they're growing up in privilege, they're often blind to it. But it seems that you were really cognizant and really recognized that there was a gap.
Yeah, I was aware of it, and I think one of the most exciting days for us was the first democratic election, which was everybody was given a public holiday on that day to get them to the polls, and I think it eventually extended into 3 days of public holidays, because just everybody was out to vote, and the queues, people were standing in queues for a day or longer, and then would go back the next morning and join the queue again. And there was such a feeling of hope and anticipation, and it was just such an exciting time for everybody. Yeah. Even those of us who had been lucky enough to have the vote all along, but to be sharing in that democracy was something quite exciting. And thinking back now, I think those feelings and being part of that was something very important in my life.
And then you have school just completely changes, is that right, in terms of everyone's now in the same school?
Yes. So independent schools in South Africa had always been open to all races, but obviously there's a a fee, and they're not cheap. State schools there were different schooling systems for people of different races, and a whole different education system as well that went along with that. Certain aspects of the education system were designed to keep people in labouring positions. So a total inequity. But as apartheid ended, schools then opened up, and that in itself wasn't actually without its problems, because students were coming into a different system with a background that didn't actually prepare them for that. And teachers were sitting in classes with students of all different capabilities needing to address all those issues. And in those days, I'm talking quite a long time ago now, differentiation was something you taught at different levels, but it wasn't a word that we really knew that much about. So it was really difficult, and teachers were struggling remembering our classes were fairly big, certainly bigger than what I've had in Australia. We would have classes of upwards of 35 students, and then having to differentiate and accommodate the needs of all different students was incredibly challenging. And I think that's probably when I first became aware of the necessity to be able to accommodate different students on different pathways, but also to be able to support students wherever they are to get to where they want to be.
What about school? How was school for you?
I loved school. Though I used to, now with hindsight, I think I experienced a fair amount of anxiety. I was a good student, but at the same time I was a terrible procrastinator, which I still am. and I think part of that is about maybe being a bit of a perfectionist, and then rather than leaving it until I know I'll get it absolutely right. So that would have added some stress levels to my school years, because I would leave assignments and so on until the last minute, but I would always get them done. I think I struggled when I first went into teaching, and I thought, there are actually students out there who don't study for tests. How can you not study for a test? Yeah. This is beyond me. Because I was a bit of a geek when it came to that. So I worked hard at school. And therefore I enjoyed that aspect of it. But as I say, it did come with a certain amount of anxiety for me, because I really wanted to achieve well. Yeah. And I did well, not brilliantly, at school.
That's quite interesting, because personally I remember schooling as well, and it was also a time of anxiety. Everyone's pushing the grades up on you. You're always comparing yourself with the other person, how to get that rank. And so it's kind of interesting, because my first reaction was, how do I kind of get the freedom when I leave? And so I think it's a rare few that decide to go back to school after leaving school. How did that come out?
Well, actually, it wasn't really by choice. In South Africa, university had to be paid up front unless you had a bursary or a scholarship. And my parents just weren't in the position to pay for university. It was really, really expensive. So I did need to get a bursary. It was what it was called then. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I do remember applying at the electricity company for a scholarship there. And I was very excited because I got down to the last two, but I didn't get it. And it was frustrating, because the boy who got it actually was at school with me, and I did so much better than him academically. Yeah. But in those days, and I know it's different now, when it comes to scholarships, it was if there was a boy going for an engineering degree, he'd be the one who'd get the scholarship. So, but there were a lot of teachers' bursary. It was called the bursary, and it was through the government, and they would pay for your degree and your residence if necessary. So it was pretty good, and that was a way. I knew I wanted to study, so it was a way for me to go to university. So really I chose teaching because it was a degree I could do and would get paid for, and it worked out all right for me in the end.
Did work out. It worked out very well. Yeah. Okay, right. And so what were your early years as an educator like then?
I worked then in a state school in South Africa, and my first few years obviously were still within the quite a number of years were still under the apartheid system. So the schools that I worked at and taught at were purely for white students. They were always fairly strong academic schools. The standards there and still today, I think, are pretty good. It was year 11 and 12 were hard years because you would do external exams at the end of year 12 on 2 years' worth of work. So the exam covered everything that you'd done in the last 2 years. And they were long exams. They'd be 2-3 hour exams. So it was pretty full on. And the external exam counted, I think, 70% or 75%. It was big, yeah. But sorry, I'm going back. I'm not really answering your question. Yeah, teaching, I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. And we had a lot of fun. There were a lot of young teachers at the first school I was at, and we not only enjoyed our teaching together, but our break times were great fun in the staff room, and we socialised together outside of school. So it was a good life. Yeah. Except for the salary. The salaries were terrible. My husband was a teacher as well, and we couldn't live on 2 teachers' salaries in South Africa. No, it was very, very poor. So he had to leave teaching, otherwise we just couldn't survive. And I know to get our first car, we had to borrow money from his dad because you just couldn't pay for even a second-hand little car. So unfortunately, that was the case then. It was very, very poorly paid. Okay. So when we came to Australia, it was, whoa, this is fantastic.
Is that what motivated the move from South Africa to Australia?
No, not at all. We've got 3 daughters, and we were at a time in our lives where my oldest sister had moved to Australia and had spoken, she loved it here. And we were just getting a bit concerned about our daughter's future, our ability to send them to university because it was so incredibly expensive, and we were aware of how HECS worked here. It was getting more dangerous. Crime was picking up, so we were concerned about that. And we were concerned about the economy of the country, to be honest. So if it was just the 2 of us, we probably would never have left. And but we made the move for our daughters. And all of us still love South Africa and do like to go back and visit, and we've got a lot of family there, but we've certainly made a life here, and the kids have we've all embraced it. And we've been here 18 years now, so yeah, so it's our home.
And when you moved to Australia, it seems like you quite quickly fell into like educational leadership.
Yes.
So you moved from head of year of Brisbane Girls Grammar to Lourdes to St. Margaret's Deputy to Principal of Glennie and then Principal of St. Stephen's, and then now you're head of the Indie School.
Yes.
What does that evolution as a leader kind of look like for you?
It's been interesting because, and I keep harking back to South Africa, I suppose it is a big part of my formation. But at that time, the only route you would take would be from being a teacher into possibly a head of faculty or head of subject to a deputy to a principal. That was the only sort of leadership journey and the only leadership positions there were in schools. And I never really had my heart on being in leadership at all. But I came over here and I was at Brisbane Girls Grammar School as a teacher. And early on, a head of house was taking some leave. And I was approached and asked if I'd be prepared to be the acting head of house. And I didn't really even know what they did. And I said, yes, I'll do that. And really enjoyed that aspect. So it was a pastoral leadership position, so overseeing the students' well-being within my house. And houses in South Africa, we also had houses there, but it was only purely for sport, whereas here at a lot of schools, including Girls Grammar, it was more about the pastoral, the overall well-being of the student, and I really, really enjoyed that. It wasn't something I'd done before. So when a position came up at the school, after I'd been in the acting position, a more permanent position came up, and I applied for that, and I got it, and I absolutely loved it. And I loved engaging with the staff at that level, at a leadership level. And I realised that, maybe I will look a little bit further into leadership in education, and that's what I've done. So it's been a good journey.
So you didn't have your heart in leadership in the beginning?
No, absolutely not. I think because I was tapped on the shoulder and said, would you like to try this out, I would never have even considered it, because I think I just felt, probably like so many women, just felt I wasn't up to it because I didn't tick every single box. And have learned since then that very few people tick every single box. You really need to go where your heart is. And I didn't even realize that my heart was there. But it's the pastoral care and the well-being of students that I'm really become passionate about.
Okay. What boxes did you think you didn't tick?
I just didn't see myself as a leader, really. And it took somebody else to tell me that, hang on, you do have leadership abilities. And I don't know why I didn't, because when I was at residential college, I was the chairperson there. So I don't know why. I don't know if it was a confidence thing or it was just the way we were brought up to be pretty humble. And I've realised now you can be a leader with humility. So and also I suppose because there were so few leadership opportunities in education in South Africa that when I came here I didn't even think about it really. Yeah. So it was great that somebody had tapped me on the shoulder.
Interesting. And so someone taps you on the shoulder, you realize you love it, and you realize that the boxes that you thought you hadn't ticked didn't need to be ticked or could be ticked later on.
Well, absolutely. I think I realized then because people would ask me questions or turn to me for advice, and I realized, oh, hang on, I can do this, and I like doing this, and then and I really enjoyed the well-being aspect and dealing with the girls at that level and their parents, and then a position came up as a assistant principal of students, which in other at a Catholic independent school, at other schools that's called a dean of students or something similar, dean of well-being. And I thought, oh well, let me extend this a bit further, and I got into that role and really loved that as well. Yeah. So it's been very fulfilling, and I've certainly tried, when I've recognised potential in others, to tap others on the shoulder to say, you can do this, and why don't you have a try? Because again, people often don't realise how much they've got to offer until they're actually doing it.
Yeah, I think even personally, I remember before I kind of went on my own ventures and stuff like that, I had a mentor from my old school come and say, you can do all these things, and it was talking to me as if I had already done it, even though I had no idea how to do it. Yeah. I think just like that kind of someone else believing you in more than you believe in yourself can do a lot of wonders.
Absolutely, and putting yourself out there. Yeah. Every day was quite scary because it was, all right, what am I doing now? And you just get in there and do it, and you can do things that you don't realize you can actually do. Yeah. Until you really put your mind to it, and you pretty much have to, and so it happens.
Okay, and then that's how you kind of just keep following that process, putting your mind to it, getting it done, and keep believing yourself, and that kind of transitions you to even higher heights in leadership.
And I think it's the whole idea of the growth mindset is, and I know to an extent that's been poo-pooed a bit, but it's the implementation of that accurately isn't only about putting the effort in, but it's a whole mindset of understanding that failure can happen, and that's okay. You're going to grow from that, and sometimes you have to fail in order to succeed further down the line. And every time that happens, you do grow a little bit. So I'm not saying by any means that when I got into leadership, or even now, that I do everything right. But you certainly grow from those mistakes.
What have you been your, I guess, biggest growing points along your journey?
I think when you have expectations of people, you need to be very clear to them as to exactly what those expectations are, because otherwise you can be disappointed when they don't fulfill them, but at the same time they haven't actually known what you wanted from them. And I've really grown a lot in that area, in knowing that you can't just expect people to read your mind, if you like. You really do have to be quite direct without being micromanaging or undermining in any way.
Yeah, I think definitely that's something that I've also felt, the discernment between the level of quality of instructions, because if they can't, it's one thing if they can't follow the instructions, but is the instruction the failure, or is it them not being able to follow the right instructions? Yeah. And so I remember this analogy is you can ask them to make a bed, or you can ask them to make a bed like a 5-star hotel worker would, and then there's really different expectations when you're asking them to do the same task.
Yeah, actually, that's really well put. It's to just be more direct and clear and give that clarity, and that's been a big learning curve for me.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I still don't have that right. I don't think so. Hopefully, hopefully we'll get there.
Come with time.
Yeah.
Okay, right. When I kind of think of a leader, I think of someone who shapes and then communicates the vision. And then after doing a bit of digging, I found that you might be a bit of a fan of Simon Sinek.
Yes, absolutely.
Can I ask, what is your why?
Oh, that's such a difficult question, and I've thought about that a lot, and I think it's to provide young people, or not provide them, to encourage young people to discover their purpose, and get on the right pathway towards that. So is that my why or is that my what? I always get a little bit, tangled up in those. But I think that's what it's about. I think it's about being there for young people, helping them get on the right pathway for themselves.
It's always evolving, always trying to decide what the right one is.
I have I've been in schools, and in a number of schools, obviously, where the most important thing has often been, well, it used to be the OP and now it's the ATAR. And I've realized that that's certainly not for every student. They really need to know where they want to be, what they want to do, and what it's going to take to get them there. And if they don't know, and some of them don't, because it's really difficult to determine your purpose at a young age or the pathway you want to take, it's about keeping the options open for them to be able to, at some point, go whichever direction they want to.
How does, I guess, your vision for what you want to help with students, especially with like the gap and then kind of shaping them into what they want to be and what options they can have, mesh in terms of a school's objective, or what a school's trying to get out of it? Are you trying to produce like happy students? Are you trying to produce grades? Are you trying to produce character? How do you define success as a leader?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I always talk to students about success, and I say, as a graduate, we want you to be successful as you walk out the door. But success means something different to every single student, and I guess that comes back to their purpose, is if they've succeeded within that, or they're on their pathway towards that purpose, they have experienced success. And success for some of them may be getting all A's, or getting into medicine, or whatever it is. But for others, it may be attending school on a daily basis, because they have so much stress in their lives and it is so difficult for them to get there, that if they are getting to school, they have achieved success on their pathway to wherever they need to be. So for me, I really see my vision of a graduate from a school, because that's how I like to look at it, is what do we want our graduates to look like, or the students who have finished with us at school to look like. And the words that always come to my mind are confident, resilient, and have integrity. I think in this world in particular now, it's almost harder and harder with all the social media, what's going on in the world, for people to hang on to integrity. And so people say integrity is what you do when nobody's looking. And I actually think that part of integrity is what you do when others are looking, because so often it's difficult to stand for the right thing when others around you are not, and they're expecting you to fold, or to go down a different route, and to actually stand firm when you know it's the right thing is so difficult. And if we can teach students to do that, not to be inflexible, but when they know something's the right thing, to actually follow through on that. And the resilience aspect is, again, in today's world, I find that there are often excuses not to be doing what you need to do. There's so many reasons to get out of something, or not do it, or not finish something. As soon as people hit a roadblock, often, that's when they bail, and that's when the strength of character and the resilience really comes through. Yeah. And confidence, of course, will help with that. And with all of that together, they'll go out into the world and hopefully help make it a better place, because that's what we need right now.
I think that's definitely right. And I think amongst young people, I've definitely felt it myself. There seems to be like a lowering amount of hope amongst maybe young people. And Have you felt, I guess, your 3 goals become more challenging with time?
I have. I found, I know it's really easy to blame technology and social media and, the digital world, but it certainly has become so much more difficult. And I feel that particularly adolescents, because adolescents are who I've worked with the most, the knocks to their confidence through social media, through conversations on there, watching some people with specific ideas that they just swallow. It really has made it more difficult. I've seen a real lowering in confidence in adolescents over the past 10 years. Excuse me. And I find that very concerning. But I also find very concerning in education is that so much more is being put onto teachers. Teachers we're supposed to now be increasing discipline in schools to bring down the crime rate, and the whole question of consent is being put on schools to address, which is fine. We're happy to do that, but it has to be in partnership with home. But so often you see the government or people in power saying, well, let the schools sort that out. The schools need to be doing this. Why aren't the schools teaching that? And that's all very well, but there's also a full curriculum that schools are expected to teach. So the pressure that's been put on teachers at the same time as the outer world becoming a far more difficult place is almost unsustainable. It's a bit worrying.
Yeah. And I think it seems like the requirements of education are kind of changing a lot over the last kind of couple decades. And a lot of, I guess, parents and governments are looking for the same thing in the past. And so how do you kind of also educate your parents and those type of people of what you need to do?
It is a difficult one with the educating of parents, because people are incredibly busy. So the communications that come out of the school, sometimes it's just too much, and parents eventually switch off. But then if you're not communicating certain things, there's a frustration that the school's not getting that communication through. So a lot of schools will provide speakers, will send out newsletters, will try and educate parents in the new trends in education, the new issues that are facing adolescents that we are coming across in education, that I'm sure they're coming across as parents, but sometimes we'll see it with a greater intensity. But the difficulty is parents finding the time to be either reading those newsletters, attending the functions at the schools, watching the podcasts that the schools are putting out, or the vodcasts, rather. So again, that's a little bit of a frustrating one. We talk a lot about partnerships with schools, and I think that is incredibly important. Both sides need to be really open to that, to having the open conversations and to really hearing each other. Because at the end of the day, we're all there for the same reason. We're all there for the students and to help them to succeed and to be independent people with a good sense of well-being, a strong sense of well-being.
Have you felt that there's been a growing, I guess, level of conflict between schools and parents recently?
It's certainly increased over a number of years as parents have become more involved. I mean, when I think back to my days when I was young, parents weren't involved at school at all. You were dropped off at school, and it was the school's issue, and parents would see the report when it came out and maybe go to the parent-teacher interviews if they felt like it. Now we do want to have that closer relationship. We do want the parents more involved. And I suppose on the back of that, you are going to get more conflict with people having different ideas. It is an interesting environment in education because a lot of people have opinions on how education should look. And it's one of the few professions, I think, where a lot of people who are not in education feel that they know a lot about education and they can be telling us how to do our jobs, really, which does happen to an extent. And I'm not just talking about parents, I'm talking about in the media and governments and so on. So it can be quite trying at times, especially because teachers are generally highly professional people who are doing a lot of reading, who are doing professional development to stay on top of what the latest trends are. and to ensure that what they're doing is the best for the students in their care. And sometimes parents don't agree that educationally that is the best thing for their child. So that's when you really want to have those good, robust conversations about it. And people do value that, but at the end of the day, the teachers do need to be able to do their jobs in teaching the kids.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of work.
It is. It's a big job, and it's got so much bigger because, of course, it used to be that you taught your subject. In fact, I think even when my daughters were fairly young, there was no such thing as well-being, or there were guidance officers, but you didn't have a well-being lesson. And that is something that we do now, which is great because teachers get to really know students get to know the teachers, and we can really delve into important issues. But at the same time, it is putting a lot more on teachers in that they now are having those well-being lessons. They are very engaged in students' well-being. But as I said earlier, so many other things are expected to be addressed in schools, and yet there is such a full curriculum that it becomes difficult as to where do you find the time to do all of this stuff and still not put too much pressure on these kids, because it's a very stressful world out there.
Yeah. So it sounds like there are kind of two problems there, where too much stress and time is being put on the kids, but also the teachers as well.
Yeah.
Let's start with the teachers. How do you is there any solutions to managing it? How are you maybe managing that problem?
Oh. You're asking a big question here. Look, I think at the end of the day, we've got to be very aware and mindful of teacher well-being, remembering that they would have up to, various numbers of students in the class, but often you've got between 25 and 30 students in a class. That's a lot of young people for a teacher to, and a exactly. So a teacher may often be teaching 120 students. And as much as we do want to be able to provide every child with their own learning journey, it does become difficult in a situation where you have large classes. So I think teachers in general do a phenomenal job because they still manage within that to do the differentiation, to teach students at different levels, to do the adjustments that are necessary for students who are struggling, and to provide enrichment for those students who are at the upper level. So therein lies probably the stress factor for them. I do not know what the solution is. I know in some countries they've got much bigger classes, allowing teachers to have more spare time to be able to develop and prepare and mark and so on. But then there's the bigger class situation. So it's a difficult one. I think a lot of the compliance aspects and administrative stuff that seem to just be piling up probably are things that need to be relooked at by the government and education departments, because there's probably too much of that. It does take up a lot of time. The paperwork takes up a lot of time. Yeah. And continual adjustments to the curriculum. Yeah. Just recently there's been a new version of the Australian curriculum coming through, and the whole idea was that it was going to be reviewed because it was very, very full. So teachers were pretty excited about that, but unfortunately the new version is pretty much as full. In fact, maths is fuller. So there's that. I think the curriculum does need to be adjusted to be more realistic, and maybe to be addressing topics maybe in a little bit more depth, but not as much breadth possibly.
I think you mentioned before about integrity being about saying the right thing when people are watching. And looking at, I guess, your history, I think you've been pretty vocal about improving the treatment of women in workplaces. And so, which was a topic was kind of interesting for me, because just from an outsider's perspective, I always remember all my teachers being women. And so I would have thought that maybe education would be one of those disciplines where it would have avoided this kind of big social issue currently, but maybe that's not the case. Can you maybe talk to me a bit more about that experience?
I suppose it's interesting. I'll share with you a story, and I think this is the sort of incidental sexism that is occurring all the time. And I remember talking when I was a principal of one of the independent schools, and I was talking to a principal of another school, a male principal, and we were having the chat on the pavement after a sorry, people here call it a nature strip, on the nature strip after a service at his school. And another elderly chap was standing with us. I think he was actually on the board of that school. And I'd mentioned, the principal said to me, "Oh, will I be seeing you at the conference next week?" And I said, no, I'm not actually going to be attending that conference. And this other person who I didn't know, I'd never met him before, he said to me, "Oh, why aren't you going to the conference? You're going to be going to do your hair?" And I just thought, really? And to be honest, I was just so gobsmacked I didn't have a response. But it's those little things that, in the greater scheme of things, oh, really? So he said that, what's the big deal? But it's that continual sort of commentary that you get as a female leader that would just be, it's just niggling. At another function, a breakfast function, there were a number of female principals and male principals. We were sitting together at a table, and the local politician came over, and he shook all the men's hands, and he sort of then kind of turned to the woman and gave us a little half-hearted wave. And I thought, he doesn't even realise he's doing it. But it happens.
It's quite discrediting.
And I suppose it is interesting when you look at the percentage, as you said, the majority of your teachers were female, but then you look at leadership in schools, and the majority there is not female. So why is that the case when in a workforce that is mainly female, why is leadership so skewed the other way? It's just, I suppose I haven't been that vocal about those sorts of issues, but they are things that do bother me, and I've had a bit to say about it, I know. But I've moved into a different area of education, which I'm finding incredibly rewarding, and that is a special assistance school. So I'm heading a special assistance school, and I've opened a new campus of one. And I think the really rewarding part for me is that these are, a lot of the students here are on a different pathway. And we're really, really supporting them and guiding them to help them find what their purpose is and get onto that pathway and whatever they need, because it's a small school and we have small classes, we can really support them to get there. So I feel that when I was a principal in an independent school, and sometimes you have to let students go because they are being very disruptive. They're preventing other students from learning. And at the same time, you're feeling that terrible, I don't know if guilt's a word, but sorrow, because you know that the best place for that student to be is in school. Yet you've got to look at the bigger picture and the effect they're having on others. And when I had to make those decisions in mainstream school, I always wondered, where can the student go but to another mainstream school, and they're going to have the same issues. So being in a special assistance school, I'm recognising that there is a place for these students who are disengaged in mainstream education, and through a different curriculum, a different approach, hopefully we can get them on the road to success, which is very exciting.
Yeah, definitely exciting indeed. Yeah. It's pretty different, head of indie school, Brisbane CBD. It's pretty different to your previous roles. Does your responsibility in that role also look different?
Yeah, it is very, very different. I'm far more hands-on with the students, which I love. Yeah. In fact, I've moved my office to be right in the middle of their rec room, which I'm not sure that they love. Work very closely with the staff. It's a small staff, and every student has an independent learning plan, which a number of students do have in mainstream schools as well. But we're referring to them very regularly, updating them, looking through them. And given the small nature of the school, you can really be very hands-on in what you do. So it's very, very different for me, quite operational. So obviously there is strategy and vision and all of that you have to do in any school in a leadership position. but this is probably more hands-on than what I'm used to. So early days still, but certainly enjoying it and enjoying making that difference to these particular students.
Definitely. Are there any learnings that you found at this new school that's for specially assisted kids that you've thought, wow, this would be a great maybe initiative that I could have used in past schools? Or
Yeah, I think we base our teaching on the Berry Street trauma-informed model of teaching, which a number of teachers in mainstream schools are very aware of. But I think if you look at the model, it really is just appropriate in any school setting. And what I really love about it is that you're treating every student with what we call unconditional positive regard, which means no matter what they do, on a daily basis, if there's been really bad behavior, you address it, it's dealt with. The next day they come to school and we start again. And that is put behind you and we start again. So their behavior is addressed, but not the person or the character of the person. And of course, that's what we should be doing with every student, and I think most teachers do that. But it's lovely to actually have some words around it and affirming that this is the way we do things. It is that conversation, and it's using students' strengths to help them overcome certain situations. So we look at their strengths and we say, all right, and they do the character strength survey, so it's all very clear what their strengths are, and we look at what strengths can we use now to help you get through this situation. It all sounds wonderful in theory. It's not always that easy in practice, but certainly we're all learning together, and myself and the staff are learning together as we go.
incredible. It sounds like it requires a lot more patience.
There is a lot of patience, but also because we're out there with the students, you're building those relationships all the time. So I will spend every morning tea and lunchtime either in the cafeteria or the rec room or wherever it is that the students are. We play cards and play chess, and there's a great engagement with the students and getting to know them. So when it comes to having those difficult conversations, you've already got a really good relationship, which is certainly is the case in mainstream schools as well. But where we've got 100 students in a mainstream school, you've got 1,000 students. So, it's about relationships and how deep those can be.
Yeah, definitely necessary. And I think at my old school, I don't remember actually speaking to my principal. And so that's like the fact that you can come into the rec room and you have your table in the middle of it is, I'm sure, is really good for them.
Yeah. Well, good and bad, I think. Depends how you look at it, I suppose.
Maybe they want to have a bit of alone time.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's a great school and it's adapted for the students. We have school 4 days a week, which is fantastic because teachers get a whole day to be doing that preparation and relieving that stress a little bit that we spoke about earlier. So they still work there 5 days, but they do have that bit of breathing space as well.
Okay. Can I ask you, what are you good at in terms of leadership?
Oh my goodness. Holy moly, what a difficult question. I think I'm good at collaboration and hearing other people's viewpoints. Not everybody would agree with that because I think a lot of people sometimes think collaboration and consultation means you have to listen and take on board what they're saying, which yes you do, but also that then you have to implement it, which no you don't. So it is about listening to other viewpoints, looking at them all, determining where you're going to go, and more often than not, I will change a direction we're going in because of advice and opinions I've had from others who are more involved, more engaged at that level. So I think that's something that I do pretty well. We like to have a good laugh. I think that's incredibly important, especially when things are getting tough, and be able to laugh at yourself. And certainly one area that I am strong at is acknowledging when I've made a mistake. I will absolutely own it and hopefully learn from it. And I think you can't be a leader if you're not prepared to do that, because certainly nobody's perfect and we all make mistakes.
I think that vulnerability aspect is super important. Makes people want to open up and up to you, be transparent with you and honest to you, and yeah.
I hope so. That doesn't always happen, of course, it doesn't. But I certainly have, in the main, found that people have said that they find me approachable and that they are happy to come and talk to me about concerns. I think there will always be those people who do view someone in a leadership position with a certain amount of mistrust and skepticism, and I don't know if that's because of past experiences or if it's just the way leadership is portrayed in general in the media. But I certainly prefer people to come and have that conversation.
And I think I read pretty clearly from maybe one of your bios is that the role of a principal is that of a CEO, and you listed of like stakeholder management and stuff like that. But as an educator, you often have a background in teaching, and then not that in business. How have you kind of traversed those learnings from between like becoming maybe assistant principal of studies and stuff like that into a principal role where you're looking at all of these different realms?
It's a huge role, and it definitely is a CEO role. So my role at the moment is head of school, and it's not a principal role, so it's far less stressful than when I was a principal in a mainstream school. But if we refer to the principal role, definitely a CEO role. You are responsible for the strategic direction of the school, for the vision of the school, for all the staffing, as well as having to have a handle on the finances, on the budget, on the daily operation and overall operations of the school, as well as, of course, the most important thing is the education. So I think a lot of people think that a principal only oversees the education of the students and disciplines them from time to time, but it's vast. It's much bigger than that. And then, of course, in this day and age, there's the building of relationships between the school and industry, and the school and organizations, and the school and universities, all those relationships that are being built as well. So you very much learn on the job because, as you mentioned, principals are educators, and we've got degrees in education. So from my perspective, what was very, very useful was doing the AICD director's course. And I know a lot of principals do that. A number go to universities and do business courses or even MBAs and business degrees. I didn't do that. I did the director's course. I did a course through the Melbourne University in strategic planning and thinking. So you will find that principals do a lot of professional development in developing in those areas. One of the things that was incredibly important to me as a principal was my peer group of principals, colleagues. So I was part of a round table where there were a group of us that met once a month. Then I would have another network of principals in the area where I was a principal, and we would call on each other a lot. Because I think a principal is the only person who really understands what another principal's going through. And it can be quite a lonely job because there are certain things that are confidential from staff, but also having to address all those issues. It's very important that you've got your colleagues, they have your back, and they are there to support you. And I think they're fantastic networks of principals supporting each other. And advising each other, certainly as a new principal as well. When these things come out of left field, the first thing you do is phone another one and say, hey, have you ever experienced this? Help. Yeah.
Did you find it easy initially getting that advice?
Yes, I found there are networks, and certainly people are very happy to advise you, to help you, to support you, catch up for a coffee, or more often than not, a quick Teams meeting. See, I've got this issue, how would you deal with it? I'm not sure how to deal with this. So there's a lot of communication that's happening there at that level. And
there's got to be many people potentially, hopefully listening to this podcast and listening to what you said and saying, hey, that's me. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be a leader or not. And then someone put me in that role, or I'm going into leadership and then it's getting maybe lonelier and lonelier. And I'm not sure what to do at that situation. And so do you have any helpful words from Kim now to maybe Kim at those times?
Yeah.
Piece of advice.
Well, I think the most important thing is that you can never make everybody happy. whichever direction you go and whichever decision you make, there'll always be a group that are not going to be happy. And you kind of got to take that on the chin. Sometimes, though, you make a decision and with hindsight, you see it was the wrong one. Be prepared to change it. Take on board, hear what people are saying, apologize if it's appropriate, and be prepared to change it. Because actually, people recognize true leadership, I think, in those times more often than not when you're getting everything right and leading from the front. And certainly use your network. That is so vital that people are not going to think any less of you for asking them a question or reaching out, and it doesn't matter how experienced you are. It's really important to be engaging with those people who are in a similar situation to you. I think that's how we all get through it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, right. Kim, we've talked a lot today about the changing landscape in education, so like media, equality, leadership, and stuff like that. But to kind of bring business into education, there was a framework from Jeff Bezos that he said that I found really insightful, and it was that everyone is always asking the question of what's going to change in 10 years, but no one really asked the question of what's going to stay the same in 10 years. And he actually thinks that question is the more important of the two, because in Amazon's case, what's not going to change in 10 years? People are always going to want lower prices, faster shipping, and more selection. And so they've built an entire business around that into a massive business. And so the thing I wanted to ask you, or the thing that was on top of mind to ask you today, was what do you think is not going to change in education over maybe the next 10 years?
I think people's need for connection, for human connection. And we found that during COVID, where we were doing a lot of online teaching. And that was certainly the thing that was missing for students, for teachers. And in Queensland, we were lucky, of course, and we struggled. So in places like Melbourne and overseas, it was just absolutely horrendous. And people just need that connection with each other and relationships. Since I was at university and long before me, and I'm sure long after me, they will talk about the most important thing that a teacher needs to have in order to be successful is good relationships with the kids. And that doesn't mean they have to be their friend, but they need to know that you care. And I don't think that's ever going to change.
Yeah. Right. And are we moving in the right direction for that?
Look, I actually do think so. When you think about, again, going back many years, a teacher was told, don't smile until Easter. And now it's like, you don't smile until Easter, you're going to lose those kids, because they make up their mind very quickly about their teacher. And if they know you care and you're there for them and you listen and hear them, it can only be good. And that certainly has improved over the years, where that relationship has become far more relaxed, as opposed to the stern teacher standing in front of the class behind a podium without having any interest in the students and vice versa.
I think your perspective is very characteristic of you, because so much of what you've talked about in this conversation is about connection and is about, bring yourself closer to the student, being more open with your staff and placing more emphasis on kind of talking to your students and building that connection. Yeah. Okay, right. A tradition that I've wanted started on this podcast is that I want to get the problem of the previous guests and then ask for the current guest's advice on that problem. And so the previous guest is, for a bit of context, a student doing an education degree. Oh, yes. And so she just had her placements, and something that she's been reflecting on a lot is that there are so many students, they're dealing with those issues we talked earlier about, like losing hope, things are becoming more difficult for them. And she is an incredibly empathetic person, wants to, like you said, care a lot. And she finds it very difficult to reconcile with the fact that she can't help all of them. And she can't really develop that kind of individual, personalized help with every single one of them. And she thinks, and it's almost like an impossible problem, right? Can you relate to that problem?
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me an impossible problem to solve.
No worries. I'll bring it up with
Look, again, it is about those relationships, and she's right. You can't save them all. But what you can do is help lift their gaze, because I think those students without hope are looking down. They're thinking there's no ways out. Where are they going to end up? And if we can help lift their gaze to see what opportunities there are out there, to see what we recognize in them, because sometimes they feel through generational despair or trauma or whatever it is that there's no hope. They look sometimes to their parents, and it's a really bad situation. And if they can understand that actually there is something out there for them, they don't have to be trapped in the situation that they're in. They might not have the power to do anything about it right now, but if they can just maintain control. I mean, there's a wonderful analogy, and it sounds a bit cliched because people use it a lot of the time, and that's about your life being a journey. And there are a lot of rough roads and a lot of smooth roads, and when after a smooth road there will be a rough one, and after a rough one there will be a smooth one. But the one thing that you're in control of is that steering wheel and being in control of the car. So things are going to come at you from every direction. And this isn't my idea, by the way. So, but they come at you from every direction, and you've got no control over them. But you've got control of your own reactions and actions. And I think those students who have sort of lost that hope, if they understand that their own actions and reactions ultimately will help get them through this. But I'm not a psychologist, and neither is she. No. So as a teacher, you can do what you can. You have those conversations. You try and lift their gaze. And it's not going to work for some of them, but it is going to work for some of them. And that's the thing. If you make a difference to one kid in a class, wow, that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
So the last thing you want to do is for teaching students, people who are wanting to become educators, to lose hope, because they've got to really recognize that if they make a difference to one, they're making a difference to a huge percentage.
Yeah. Just try and save as many as you can.
That's right. That's right.
That's great advice.
Yeah, well.
I'll make sure to let her know. And so, can I ask you, what is the maybe most pressing problem or pain point that you're dealing with right now that you would want maybe the next guest to shine some light on?
I think it's about getting all students to recognize the importance of education in their lives, that whatever they want to do requires a certain amount of education, whether they want to do an apprenticeship down the line, whether they want to do a high-level degree, whatever it is, education is important for them to get there. But education is also important to make them a more interesting person and to make them more interested person. So whilst they might think, well, why am I reading this book in English? It's of no relevance to me. The fact that you can maybe have a discussion somewhere or have a bit of knowledge about Shakespeare does make you a slightly more interesting person. So every bit of education is adding to that to that treasure, I suppose, that's going to create you into who you're going to be one day. And if students could just recognize that. But of course that's difficult because adolescents don't always want to. That's my problem.
Right. It's a difficult problem.
An impossible one
and a
as
possible
well.
one as well.
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to be getting a lot of those
Sure you are.
on this show. But maybe we can put together the problem or the solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'll make sure to let you know what the next guest
Thank
says.
you.
But Kim, I think something that stuck out over this conversation is, I guess, your growth into leadership, recognizing increasingly what became more and more important to you, and kind of that connection, that caring, and the very, very human element that you constantly talk about, the very people element. And so it's been an honor, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, well, it's been wonderful being here. Thanks so much for the opportunity.